Welcome to the Career Refresh Podcast. I'm your host, Jill Griffin. I'm a former media and marketing executive turned career strategist and executive coach. I spent my career working my way up and through the ranks of global organizations and startups, and today I show others how to do the same. Join me each week as we discuss the strategies and actionable steps to leverage your strengths, increase your confidence, and develop your career well-being. Ready? Let's do it. Hey friends, welcome back to the podcast. Over the last few weeks, I've been having conversations with friends of mine who are experts in their field. And the theme that's been coming up most is how are we re-entering the workplace? Whether we're physically re-entering, whether we're still in some sort of remote work, whether we're a permanent working from home, there feels to be things shifting from the intensity of when the pandemic was at its height versus where we are now. And I understand in some areas there are still lots of precautions going on and people are working in lots of different ways. But we're talking about many of us have had a different experience for the last 2 years than what was our previous normal. And I'm not saying that we need to go back to normal because in many ways that normal wasn't working for us, but there's an opportunity as we think about re-entry to think about how do we want to show up. And one of the things that I hear so often from clients is that, they're not walking around in their pajamas all day when they're working from home, but they've been dressed much more casually. And it's been 2 years since they opened the closet and wore some of those more formal business clothes. So what are we wearing today? I mean, I know for myself, even when I walk around the streets of New York City, I'm like, oh, fashion. I mean, I was next to this man at this restaurant recently who had on a cape, and I was like, thank you. Thank you for showing up and wearing a cape and bringing it today. So whatever dress and style means for you is what we're talking about around this conversation around re-entry. So I brought in my friend, Judith Gaton. Again, she's a stylist, she's a life coach, she's an author, she's a former attorney, my people. She gets it. So she works with women to help them see that style and confidence, when they're dialed in, that they can do the work they are created to do in the world. And whether you are male, female, non-binary, this conversation is for you because we discuss how your mindset and your thoughts are key to shaping the style and your future self. So listen in, and I'll see you on the other side. You're in for a real treat. It is so good to have you today, Judith. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Hello, friend. And hello, podcast listeners. Hello.
Okay, everyone, we are in for a treat today. Judith has been a friend of mine for quite some time now, and I've just been watching the kinds of transformation that she creates in others and helping them get there. And when I was really thinking about, we're in this post-COVID mindset, whether we're actually post-COVID or not, it doesn't really matter, but we're in this what's next. And I'm even noticing in myself that I walk around and I'm like, oh, is this what we're wearing now? Because for 3 years or for 2 years, stuff sat in my closet and wasn't necessarily really dressing in the same way, in a 3D way. I was dressing more in a one-dimensional way because you're only seeing me at one point on screen. And I just wanted to bring us into a consciousness of how do we want to be thinking about re-entry and whatever re-entry means for you as we're coming out of this hard exterior shell that we've been under for the last 2 years. How do we want to be thinking about re-entry through your lens?
Yeah. And I love that you're calling it re-entry because I think there are some people who continued working and we're still going to the office. So sometimes when we hear a lot of the post-COVID talk, it's like we only are talking to the work from home, back to the office folks. Whereas re-entry kind of gives us space for all of the folks, some of whom are working from home and will continue to work from home.
Yes.
Some of us who did a hybrid schedule for a while. And then there's folks who were always in the office and are still navigating as the rest of the world comes back and re-enters what that means for them. So
I think working, as you know, in service-based positions and didn't have the luxury of not appearing into some sort of office in front of others. So it's the full gamut of what's been going on. But I think the idea of re-entry is a time to pause and reflect and be like, okay, how do I want to do this going forward?
Yeah. And I think that the key, and we'll just circle back to this probably throughout our conversation, is having a ton of grace for yourself.
Mm.
Like none of us knows how this is supposed to look.
That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
There's going to be experts and articles and all kinds of like op-ed pieces and people who think they know.
Yeah.
But the truth is, none of us really know. There's no roadmap for this. So having just a ton of grace for yourself and like listening for those times when you're like, well, I should have done this by now, or I should have, had my glow up, which I think is the version I see most in my clients is like, I should have been behind doors, getting thin and fit. And I don't know what else was supposed to happen behind those doors. But it's like, boo-boo, you survived. Like you survived.
Right.
So having just a ton of grace that none of us really knows what we're doing. And we're all kind of making it up as we go along, which is kind of the best news ever.
So let's take a step back first. And I would love for you to talk about your own personal reinvention and pivot where you were an attorney. You were a very successful attorney, and then you went to be a master style coach. So walk us through sort of what happened and what was that refresh and reinvention for you?
Yeah. So I started out, so it's funny because I started out in college as an undergrad as a fashion design major. And then I got negative criticism on a creative project. And I think it was well-intended at the time. Now I'm not so precious about it. But then I felt my poor little 20-something-year-old ego. She couldn't take it. And I had straight A's. I was an honor student. I mean, I had gone through all the rigmarole, right? And it was kind of like somebody planted the idea, you should be a lawyer. You'd be really good at it. And I was like, okay, yes, that's a safe choice, which in retrospect is such a funny thing to say.
Not that many people would consider being a lawyer a safe choice. Or more like a way to put yourself in harm's way regularly.
Right? Really have people not like your work or like you for that matter, right?
I have a lot to say about you and your profession, I'm sure.
Right. And then I went on to do insurance work and represent government entities and employers, which is like, if you're going to be any kind of an attorney, or like, that's probably not the best, like literally representing the man. And I was really good at it. And I think this is kind of an important note for anybody who's considering a career transition. I think sometimes sort of the mythos, particularly in like television and movies, is when we see people make big career transitions, it's because they're not particularly good at their job or they somehow hate their job. That's not always the case, folks. So we don't have to like super hate something or create chaos just because we simply want to change something. So I will just put that little pin in that because I think it's an important piece to note. And I found coaching. I found my coach and my mentor, and I met other former attorneys who'd gone into coaching. And one of them in particular, Carl Lowenthal, really planted this idea in my head that I could just make something up. Like I could take the things I love and the people I love serving, and I could make something up to help them. And that really stuck with me. I was like, oh wait, we're actually all just making this up as we go along. Cool. All right. And it was a slow transition. It was not an overnight. I didn't, sometimes you hear like burn the boats and how serious are you? No, mine was a 3-year transition where I slowly went from like an hour a day of working on this passion project, being a style coach, to 2 hours a day and then all weekend. And then like slowly over time, one of my dear friends, she told me something that just really cemented it was you could affect more change as a style coach than you could as an attorney.
Wow.
And that flipped things for me. And I was like, oh, because it wasn't about money.
Okay.
And it wasn't that I wasn't good at either one. I was very good at both things. And I had made something up that I loved. I'm helping like high achieving women, who figured out their careers, but not their closets, sort of sort their lives out.
Oh.
And it was so funny because I was like, oh, wait, I could affect more change. And that thought has stuck with me. Like anytime I'm like, maybe I should go back to being a lawyer. I have those thoughts too. I'm a human, right? Or, whatever my brain throws at me, it's like, oh, wait, remember? Why did we start this? We want to help the peoples. We love the peoples. How can we affect more people as a coach? At least for me. Now, that might be true of every attorney or lawyer or fill in your profession. But for me, that was very true, and it still rings very true.
And how do you stay connected to that intention? Meaning you're in the day, you're busy, you're going about, being an entrepreneur, running a business, you have 1,000,001 things in front of you to choose from. How do you find yourself staying connected to your intention of why you're doing this?
It's so funny because it's like you have to be purposeful about staying connected to the intention, right? I think sometimes we think like motivation, intention, inspiration, purpose, whatever, that we get it and we have it for all times. No, you have to practice reminding your brain. But my practice looks a lot like, I use the phrase a lot, like it's not about you.
Mm.
So before I get on a coaching call, I pray, but I also have clients who just say thoughts that they practice. For me, it's in the form of a prayer, but like, help me to serve well, help me to encourage today, help me to remember it's not about me.
Mm.
And
I bet you're sharing that because I do the same thing. I have a prayer meditation practice every morning. I look at who's on my list for the day. I hold space for each individual person that I'm meeting with and just let me be a clean vessel and to be of service however I best can to that individual. I love that you do that.
Yeah, because I think that's how we stay connected, because it's not about us. And sometimes when I stray from it, then I get funny reminders. Like I tell a story to my clients recently. I was getting on a plane after having done this, speaking gig, and I was exhausted. I was peopled out. And I was like, I'm just going to put my AirPods in and I'm going to have a moment to myself on the plane. And I put my AirPods in. I was trying to like look as grumpy as possible, which for me is really hard. Like I'm a big smiley, make eye contact person, but I was like, no, stay in your lane, right? Focus on you. And this elderly woman sat next to me and she was really struggling and having a hard time. And she's clearly terrified to fly. And I won't share her story in detail, but she was telling me things that were very personal. And literally this little voice in my head was like, still not about you.
Just when you thought.
Just when you thought your plane ride was your own, it's still not about you, girl. And I was just like, and when it was so fun, like, it was so funny, but I had practiced that in a way that serves me. I don't think it's a mean thing to tell myself. It's like the perfect thing to tell myself because, sometimes our egos take over because we're all human. And it's just a beautiful little way to find your way back to your intention. It's like, still not about you.
Right. How do you think about, if someone is coming from, again, this 2-year pause and however it represented in their life, and they're thinking about setting intention for moving forward, especially through the visual representation they bring to the world, right? So whether it's the clothes I wear, the style I put on, the shoes I choose, I'm looking at my closet being like, I don't know, am I still that person? How do you think about that as someone, if you were to give a tip for someone as they're re-entering this phase as to where would they start?
Yeah. And I love that because for so many of my clients, the woman who wore, or the person, the human that wore the clothing that's in their closet is not necessarily them anymore. And that's the beautiful thing I think about style and the way I teach style. And I think we just have to redefine this. So everywhere I go, I talk about this definition because I think this is a great place to reorient. Is style is the outward reflection of your thoughts and feelings about yourself. So whatever we're reflecting in our clothing, our makeup, our lack thereof, if you so choose, doing our hair, not doing our hair, whatever we're choosing to do with our bodies is oftentimes a reflection of what we're thinking and feeling about ourselves.
Wow.
And that makes
really
style
powerful.
personal. It's super powerful.
Yeah.
Because then we get to own the aesthetics. If we're constantly thinking within the fashion paradigm, which is like trends, forecasting, things being marketed to you heavily, and what other people externally are telling you is quote unquote fashionable, we never really adopt our own identity and what that means for us. And I think using this other definition in terms of just style being so personal, then we get to play and we get to define this for ourselves. So as we're coming out of this, as we're re-entering, it's a beautiful place to pause and say, well, actually, what do I think about myself? How do I see myself? And how am I feeling about myself? And therefore, how am I choosing to care for myself or not, dress myself or not, or Zoom mullet, half dressed, half not, like whatever you have going on. Like what thoughts and feelings are driving that action or inaction for you? Because that's going to give us a ton of information about what your next step might look like.
Yeah. So my listeners know that I talk a lot about the mindset and confidence, especially going into, it could be a meeting, it can be a presentation, it could be a conversation with your teammate, it could be a job interview, whatever it is. It's like, what are you setting the stage for? Like really envisioning that piece of what you're doing and then deciding how you're going to show up ahead of time. And that is also part of your dress. So how do you use the tool of style and the tool of apparel and the things that we put on our body as a way to help people generate that confidence, that executive presence that they might be bringing into the average day or the extraordinary day they have in front of them.
Yeah. And I like to think of it as kind of like you're the leading person of your life. And the clothes are supporting cast members. They're auditioning for a role in the movie. And I think sometimes the paradigm gets switched where we're like trying to conform to the clothing. We're going on diets. We're doing crazy shit to ourselves. Yeah. Whereas in the paradigm where you're the leading person, everything's auditioning for you, then we get to decide, okay, like this next scene is an important board meeting. Like, how do I want to show up as a leading person in this next scene? How am I feeling? What am I thinking about myself? And from that deliberate place of thinking, that deliberate, intentional place of feeling, therefore, what would I like to wear? And then it just supports the thoughts and feelings as opposed to trying to do it backwards and then feeling like we're borrowing clothes that are not our own.
Right, right. So how do you suggest someone, even if they think about like the steps they could take today with, I've invested money, I've invested time, I have a closet full of clothes that fit, the job or the career or the person I was 2 years ago. And some of it still works, some of it doesn't. But how will I know? How do I pull it together to know that I'm the leading person, not the outfit or the article of clothing being the leading person or the leading thing in the conversation?
Yeah. And I think the key part is to not start with the clothing. I think this is partly what we do is we go to our closet and we let our closet dictate like, oh, okay, so this is how I should show up. This is what should be happening versus here's how I'm choosing to think about myself. Here's how I want to feel about myself. And then we go to our closets. Okay, what supports that?
Okay, so really taking the flip and getting that centered first before stepping into the closet.
Before even going to your closet. Because when we're really oriented into how we want to think intentionally, how we want to feel intentionally, it makes it so much easier to make those decisions in our closet. Because there's some things that are just going to be an absolute no for us because of where we are right now. And there's going to be some things that's like, oh, I'd like to play with you. And then, oh, okay, here's all the gaps now that I'm seeing. So we're not buying 5 million things that we don't need. We're clearly saying, okay, actually, I would really like, and I'm just going to use an example of a current client. This person deals with a lot of money. Like they deal with a lot of money. And they're going into an environment where they're going to be in a lot more meetings. But everyone's a little bit more relaxed about these meetings than they used to be. So it used to be like a production. Everybody was in a suit and very expensive things. And everybody's a little tired. Yeah. But these meetings have to take place. So if we think about how we want to be confident. We want to look put together. But the thought is, I'm here to facilitate a discussion, not be part of a fashion show. Then we go to our closet. And as we're finding in this particular person's closet, we're going to be wearing some more relaxed kind of fitting suits. We're not going to be in Spanx. We're not going to be like wearing super fitted items, right? But we're still going to rock a suit and maybe we're going to be wearing some really nice white sneakers in this season.
Oh, okay.
Haven't been in heels in years and have no desire to go back.
Yeah.
So how do we facilitate a look that is, I'm here to facilitate a discussion. I'm not here to have a fashion parade. I want to feel confident. How do I exude that? Okay, then let's formulate a clothing formula that makes sense for how you want to show up. As opposed to going formula first and then you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Yeah. So what should they look for as they're doing that? Are there questions that you recommend they ask themselves? Or, is it even something of like, I feel most powerful when I'm wearing white. So I'm also going to think about me in wearing something white. Like what do they do?
Yeah. Okay. So here's some steps. And this is kind of where we start even in my program is we have to be a little more expansive about what we mean by fit. So I sort of like 3 layers of fit. And I think this is just a great metric that you can use in your own closets, in your own lives. There's physical fit. So folks, we've been at home trying to keep safe and a lot of us have gained weight. That's okay.
Yep.
Right? So as opposed to driving yourself crazy, I have to go on a diet, I have to blah, 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 blah. We're going to first screening is if it doesn't physically fit your body, it's just not going to have a place in this current part of your movie or your scene or however we want to use that analogy, right?
Yep.
It just doesn't have a place right now. So physical fit is going to be super duper important. This is where grace comes in. Remember that word we started with? Tons of grace for ourselves. And then our second metric that we're going to use to kind of go through our closet and decide things for ourselves is, does this fit my current lifestyle? So this is a lot for my cocktail hour peeps, my gala peeps, my people who are on committees and boards that are having parties. And like, yes, your wardrobe might have had a lot of gowns and dresses and really nice suits and, you know, however you show up in the world, right? Your idea of fancy. That may not be your current lifestyle. And we can maybe mourn that a little bit, grieve over it because things used to be a certain way and you remember that and you maybe thought it was fun. Maybe some of you are freaking relieved that you don't have to wear that shit anymore. Totally up to you however you want to feel about it. But does this fit my my current lifestyle? And a lot of your stuff may not. And at that point, we can decide two things. We can decide to get rid of those things and donate them, totally up to you. Or we could treat it like a museum archive. We're going to carefully store these things. We're just going to remove them from our line of sight because we're actually not reaching for them regularly. We're not wearing them. They're not part of our lifestyle anymore.
Okay. So also a way of things may come back around. We may feel differently about ourselves and body. We may gain or lose weight or, you know, put on muscle or lose muscle. And therefore our physical shape is different. And therefore our lifestyle may also be different. So finding a way to even store things if you're not, you know, I'm a big donator, but if donating doesn't feel right for you at this time, I love that. Finding a way to make it a museum piece and put it towards the back of the closet or maybe in a different closet or a spare room so that it's not in your face to clutter your mind each day.
Right, exactly. So we're just going to store it lovingly, carefully, and revisit the discussion at some point in time. I do recommend setting like an appointment with yourself, like 6 months from now, we're going to just revisit the archive. But it doesn't have to be this like all or nothing, get rid of it all. And I think that people find super overwhelming. So I always reassure my clients, we're not going to get rid of anything you don't want to get rid of. We're just going to store it differently until we make a different decision that we feel really good about. And then the third layer, which is where the personal style component comes in. So we've checked to see if things fit us or don't. We've checked with our lifestyle. Like, does this even make sense for my lifestyle? What I do on a day-to-day basis, how I want to live my life going forward. And then the third part is, again, the thoughts and feelings you are currently feeling or want to feel in the future. The beautiful thing about like sort of re-entry is we get to start to be a little more future focused and like, what do I want my next few months to look like? How do I want to think and feel about myself over the next few months? And with what remains in my closet, and now this beautiful list I have formulated of what I need in my closet, I can start to move forward with creating a wardrobe that reflects this part of my reentry and whatever the next step is for me.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Yeah. And it feels really calm. Like, I often use the expression wear it like a loose garment, and I mean it metaphorically, you know, so wearing the idea. So I just even love that of the concept of these sort of three questions you have that people can check in with themselves is even wearing it like a loose garment. Like, we're not necessarily trying to cram into something, but that we're approaching this next phase with ease and not with shoulds or have tos. You know, I come out of advertising and it was quite common for me to walk into the office in the morning and be asked to give a twirl. And it was, you know, it was equally a sexist thing, but it was also a judgmental thing of like, are your shoes good enough? And is the outfit good enough? And did you show up good enough today? And when I just think about how many men and women, I mean, I've heard equally from men having to give a twirl for people when they walked in some capacity and being looked over, also saying like, just this ease that I want to bring. And if I'm at a greater sense of ease, how does that change the climate around me? That I'm not as uptight and I'm not playing into the shoulds and I should look a certain way or, you know, any of the things that sort of happen in these environments. I just love that. It feels easier.
Yeah. And especially for people in leadership positions or those who manage humans, like they're watching you, you're modeling behavior for them. So if you're like, hey, you know what, going forward at our meetings, yes, I would like you all to look sharp, but I don't want anybody to be physically uncomfortable anymore. Like I refuse that for me. You don't have to do it for me either. Like, let's all just commit. We're going to find clothes that physically fit us. So we're not all flinging our shoes off and our bras off, or the case maybe at the end of the day. Like if we model that for others, oh my gosh, the ease at which you could like show up at the office and actually get back to business and your work, like you're modeling that for other folks. And even if you're an employee, maybe you're not in a leadership position, you can lead the leader by refusing to participate in paradigms that are physically uncomfortable, don't fit your lifestyle, and it's just not part of who you are personally anymore.
And are ageist, sexist, racist.
Yeah, fill in the
many,
blank.
many other ists that
colorist, right?
Yeah,
the hair thing. I have very, very curly hair. And what does it mean? And a lot of us went natural, right? Whether it's our hair color or our texture. We refuse to straighten it. We refuse to do all those things. So now we're re-entering and it's like, well, what does professionalism look like? Well, the beautiful thing is we can model for others that it can look like curly, graying, white hair or fill in the blank, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay. That is really, I really, really like that. Okay. So when we're thinking about some of the questions that clients will often ask me when we're thinking about, the Zoom or the Teams meeting versus being in person, is there anything that you would say someone should do differently? Or is it the same advice, whether I'm in a one-dimensional video environment or whether I'm physically in a 3D environment in real life meeting with other people? Is there any difference between those two that you see?
I think there is a difference just because of the way our brains work. And I think the way we've conditioned ourselves over the last few years. So a lot of us have gotten very comfortable with what the Zoom mullet that you've heard about, right? Business on top, PJs, sweats, basketball shorts, whatever on the bottom. So we actually haven't paid attention to our lower halves, which I think is just so fascinating. So yeah, it's going to be a little different walking into a 3D environment versus what we're seeing on our screens because of what we've allowed ourselves to believe we could quote unquote get away with in a Zoom screen versus in a real life environment.
Which I always think is funny because, the worst that might happen in my world is I might be, no shoes on, like I'm in bare feet right now, or I might have slippers on. But I get up and move. I have a whiteboard. Like I would be chained to the desk if, I was all business up front and party downstairs.
Yeah, I had one client who came to her call. She came to her call once and she's like, I could just see her head. And I was like, are you dressed? She's like, no, you're just going to see my head today. It was I was dying. I thought it was the funniest thing, right? Would she do that in a business meeting? I don't know what she would do in a business meeting. And that's like a hyperbolic example, but it's a real life one. It's just still, I'm delighted by it. I think it's so funny. So yeah, we've wired our brains for a little bit like, what can I get away with? And I don't know that serves us well when we're walking into a room in real life. So next time you get dressed for a Zoom meeting, I really just want you to pay attention to what are your thoughts. We don't even have to change your activity. You can choose to wear the same things you normally wear, but I want you to really tap into what is the thinking behind this outfit and what I want that thinking to follow me into a real life situation. And the beautiful thing is you have control over all of it. You get to decide what thoughts you want to keep and which aren't serving you so well should you walk into a real room.
Okay. So anything else that you would add around getting dressed for the two differences?
Yeah. And I think really how we do one thing is how we tend to do a lot of things. So while you would say definitively, oh my gosh, I would never, particularly for my lawyers. Okay. We had a lot of court calls on the phone. We did trials via Zoom, right? And you're like, I would never show up barefoot to a courtroom. Like, why are we even having this discussion? This is silly. Totally understand that.
Yep.
Whatever your thoughts were at home, they're probably showing up in other areas. And it's typically thoughts I hear like this. It doesn't matter. No one sees me. This is silly. We have bigger things to worry about. And I want to say yes. And also, how are you feeling when you think those thoughts? If you think it doesn't matter, nobody sees me, for the most part, I don't think that feels particularly good.
No.
It's not helping foster.
It also means no one's going to see you because you're going to shrink.
No one's going to see me. And then you're going to show up accordingly. Right? So those thoughts show up in other areas. If you're like, well, I could just get away with it. Do you really want that thinking to follow you around in other areas of your life? I dare say not. Like, my self-care is silly. Really? Is that like a thought you really want to think?
Right.
So that's why we pay attention to it. And like, yeah, you probably could get away with some shenanigans at home, but do you want to continue to have those thoughts follow you around? And that's the part in terms of a bigger meta picture that we really want to look at.
Yeah. It's just making me think of even, as many of my listeners know, I'm a traumatic brain injury survivor. So I always think about my physical body and that, what I'm fueling it mentally and physically, what, the food that I'm putting in my body to the food that I'm putting in my brain, and always thinking about that, like, this body is the most precious vehicle I have to deliver the work that I love and to show up for others and to be present and to take on challenges and have fun and laugh. And if I'm not taking care of this body for whatever that means for you, my way is not your way, right? We all have to find out what it means to be. But if I'm not taking care of it, then how can I show up to do the work I love? How can I show up and make a difference in the world? How can I show up with the executive presence to make the change that I want to make? So I always think of it that way too. And that it's not about a chore. It's about that this is the physical instrument that I get to bring forth in order to bring my gift to the world. So how do I want to do it? No right or wrong. It's about intent and conscious.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody who do things by default. And the things I tell my clients is like, even if nobody else saw you today, you see you. You're the most important voice in your head. You're the one that actually matters the most. So, and I even tease them sometimes, like, you smell you. Like, even if nobody else smells you today, you smell you. So, the perfume spritz is not a waste. The deodorant, if you choose to wear it, is not a waste. Like, you have to interact with you. You're the most important person. Like at, 2:00 on a Tuesday, when you go to wash your hands and you glimpse yourself in the mirror, how's your response to yourself? Are you ignoring yourself? Like, are you in dismay? Are you in shock? Are you like, hey babe, looking good? Like, all of that matters. That relationship with self is the most important thing.
So I have two more questions for you that I know very often my clients will ask me. And one is that, many of us are conserving. We're trying to think about money and our own resources, and the fashion piece sometimes, because that's what they're thinking, the style and fashion can be wasteful. Many of my clients recently just came back from the media festival in Cannes, France. And that, again, is not necessarily it's a see and be seen, but it's often around like how do you look effortlessly casual? Or my other favorite, it's like coastal grandma, which is like my other favorite type of dress that I'm seeing all over the time. And anyone that's wondering what you're thinking about it is like, think about, any of those like warm and cozy white sweaters that are like baggy, very Eileen Fisher, like that's sort of coastal grandmother, if anyone is wondering what that is. But how do you put the lens of materialistic and resources through the lens of style and fashion? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And I think it's such a good question because I get a lot from my clients, like, am I a bad feminist for caring about this? Am I a bad participant in the world? Like a good human if I'm purchasing items, blah, blah, blah. So there's a few things that it's just really important to note. When we really stop purchasing clothes that don't fit our bodies, when we stop purchasing clothes that don't fit our lifestyle, because we dismiss all the shoulds and the must-have lists, and we're really focused on our version of style, our thoughts and our feelings about ourselves outwardly reflected, we end up buying a lot less clothing.
That is a brilliant and spot on point. Yeah.
Like the noise gets around you, the cacophony that is fashion gets really dimmed down. And then it's really like, okay, what are the gaps in my wardrobe? What do I need to help facilitate the lifestyle I actually have, the thoughts and feelings that I would like to continue to support about myself? Like, it just becomes so different. We're no longer buying clothes as goal items that we have to squeeze ourselves into. Like, just a lot less purchasing happens. I see this all the time with my clients. The other thing is, when we really get intentional, because this really is about it being intentional about what we're choosing to wear, we think about shopping so differently. And one of the things I teach my clients is we call it style math in my program, but essentially it's how to make the most out of every garment that comes in. How does it fit in with the bigger picture of your wardrobe and your lifestyle and all those things? So when you get more intentional, more thoughtful about it, what does come in, what sort of passes muster through that 3-layer test, we get so much more use out of it because we're not worried about impressing people. Even if we're showing up to places to be seen, we're showing up exuding such an inner sense of confidence and calm that we literally start to physically show up differently because we're not worried about that noise going on around us so much. And it's so lovely to see my clients show up with like feeling more like themselves, feeling more confident, with a wardrobe that actually fits them. And then we teach them how to make an endless amount of outfits out of a little bit of items. We call it a mini mighty wardrobe. So it's completely possible, but it first starts with you being willing to dim down all the noise around you and really go through that 3-step process to see like what remains, what are the holes, and I'm only going to intentionally fill that because I'm not worried about what else is going on around me anymore.
Okay. That is really good. Okay. And then the last question that I often get is for my more experienced or more seasoned clientele or listeners that they want to stay contemporary. They don't want to look like they're trying too hard. They're not trying to be uber trendy and wear, younger fashion, but they're trying to stay contemporary because ageism is real and they're struggling within that. Like, how do you walk the grounds between not the coastal grandmother, but the grandparent, right? And the Gen Z, like, you're in that seasoned expertise. You may or may not hold a leadership title. It doesn't matter. We're all leaders in our own way. How do you walk the line between that to know the gut check of like what feels good on me, but does it represent to the outside world? Is it the same way that it represents to me internally? How do you tap into that? Yeah.
Okay. So here's what I want to say just generally so everyone can know a little bit what's happening. So with retailers right now, they forecasted some stuff that's a little weird, right? So we have a shortage of items actually in brick and mortar retail spaces, and then buyers didn't buy enough of what people actually wanted, and they actually weren't able to forecast correctly what people would want to be wearing right now. So you might be seeing stuff that's just a little strange to you. So I just want to throw that in.
A lot of loungewear on sale right now, my friend.
Right. So if you're running around, you're like, I don't want to wear a pussy bow blouse with giant ruffle sleeves. I don't want to look like I was raised in the prairie. And I'm not enjoying showing up to work in my pajamas. I feel you. You're not crazy. It's literally what happened. Some buyers made mistakes along the way. And then there's shipping supply shortages, et cetera, et cetera. So, but this is bound to happen likely again, right? We're going to look around at the world around us and kind of be like, what is happening? The beautiful thing is when style is personal, we don't have to worry so much about looking like Gen Z or whatever generation's going to come after us and what they're doing. When Gen Z decided we don't do side parts anymore in our hair or wear skinny jeans, I had some clients like in dismay, like, oh my God, but those are my favorite. What do I do now? And I'm like, are we really listening to Gen Z? Like, I mean, I love those guys. They're amazing, but also what? Like, some of them can't even vote yet. Why are we listening to them? So we just kind of keep things in perspective. Like, ageism is real, but we don't have to chase after fashion trends, whatever age we happen to be. Simply because it's on the rack does not actually mean it's fashionable.
Right.
Somebody somewhere got a list. They checked a box, they bought some stuff, and they took a gamble as to whether it would sell or not.
Yes. So put down the prairie dresses.
Put down the prairie dresses. That's not your jam.
Remember gunny sack? Leave the gunny sack.
Like if cottage core is not for you, and for some of my clients, that's their jam. If it's not for you, that's totally okay. It's just not for you. But in terms of like, you have your own sense of style and there's like these funny statistics about people usually adopting the style they had at whatever their peak was for them as they perceive it in their own minds. For some of us, it's high school, some of it's college, some of it graduate school. So like pick when you think you peaked and typically you're having the same haircut, same style. If we remove that idea that you've peaked at some point and you were stylish way back when, and we introduced to your brain the idea that you could be whatever your current version of stylish is now, then again, we're going to dismiss what's happening in fashion, but we can decide for ourselves what is contemporary. We can look with fresh eyes without thinking, I have to replicate when I think I was most fashionable last. And that's going to really bring you back. That's going to bring you back to the present day and keep things contemporary and fresh for yourselves. If we're not thinking of yesteryear when I used to be fashionable or skinny or beautiful or thin or 20 something or whatever, fill in your blank.
Yep.
Like, no. that's possible for me now. Whatever feelings I felt when I felt stylish, when I felt confident last, whenever that is, I can bring that to the present moment, regardless of my age, size, weight, skin color, etc.
I love it. This is so good. Thank you. Tell everyone where they can find you.
Yeah, you can come hang out with me by going to judithgaton.com. That's my website. You can check out how to work with me there, or you can make your first foray into my world by listening to my podcast, the Style Masterclass podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judith. It's always a treat to see you. I appreciate
you. So good to see you, friend. Thank you.
Bye. Hey, thanks for listening to the Career Refresh podcast. If you're enjoying this and you want more information, go to my website, jillgriffincoaching.com. There you can find information on how to work with me one-on-one or my group programs, or even bring me into your workplace. I'll put the link to my website in the show notes. But hey, listen, before you go, do me a favor, rate and review this podcast because it definitely helps me get the word out to people everywhere so that they can also thrive in the workplace. All right, friends, I appreciate you. I'll see you soon.